Former MI5 intelligence officer Annie Machon joins us now with her thoughts on this story. Annie, welcome. We've heard Mikhail Gorbachev saying that we're on the brink of a new Cold War. If that turns out to be true, where would the front line of this war be and what weapons would be being used?
I think there will be a variety of weapons, and probably the most pungent, most powerful will be the information technology that we have now. We're already seeing that, the use of the internet to try and attack each other's countries, attack each other's infrastructures potentially. So that will be the new front line. Geographically, of course, the front line has moved greatly since the fall of the Berlin Wall back in 1989, where NATO finished at East Germany. And when the reunification happened, NATO promised, the US promised to Gorbachev that it would not move 1 inch further east after reunification of Germany. That would be it. And yet, of course, since then, we've seen another 12 countries join NATO. So the front line is now including the Baltic states and Poland. And there's even talk of trying to include Ukraine and Georgia within NATO. So the front line is very much hedging in Russia at the moment.
OK, NATO has been crying foul in recent weeks about Russian military planes. This has been flying in international airspace. Why is the alliance so concerned about this?
I think they're trying to ramp up any pretext to crack down on Russia's success, actually. There seems to be a sort of overwhelming narrative within the Western media, particularly coming out of the US and parroted across other European countries, that Russia is the new big bad enemy, that they have expansionist plans, they want to go back to the old Soviet borders. And this is partly why we've seen the lies being told about what's going on in Ukraine being peddled immediately after things like the crash of MH17, before any evidence had been gathered. So I think it's very useful for the US to make a new bogeyman out of Russia. And it also suits their geostrategic purposes, particularly with trade, trying to break the trust and break the trade routes between Russia and Europe for the benefit of the US markets and its allies in the Middle East.
Annie, what do you think? Are we entering into a new arms race? And if that is the case, I mean, America has so many more weapons than anybody else. Could anybody even compete with them?
Well, I think certain countries could certainly give them a bloody nose. There's no doubt about that. Russia being one of them, China being another. And in fact, the whole BRICS configuration of countries now are rising to challenge US hegemony on many, many fronts, not just with weapons, but also financially, trying to break away from the sort of the dollar monopoly and this sort of stranglehold that US financial institutions have across the rest of the world. So I think the way that Russia is being demonized now, particularly by the US, is a way of trying to assert the US power, assert its influence, and also to see off a competitor. When Russia was broken after the fall of the Soviet Empire, we didn't see this sort of vilification going on in the media. The fact that the US is now doing that to such a great extent and fabricating, making up, telling lies about what Russia's intentions are in Ukraine, for example, shows that the US does see Russia as a credible threat these days, particularly as it's allied with Brazil and India and Iran and China particularly. Having said that, of course, if you look at the facts of what's going on, Russia has played a very restrained and very statesmanlike game in a number of international interventions, most notably with Syria and the issue of chemical weapons destruction. And it seems to be that Russia is the sort of statesmanlike, calm and peacemaking country, ironically in the face of US warmongering.
We've been hearing the thoughts there of former MI5 intelligence officer Annie Machon. Annie, thanks so much for coming on to speak to us.